You're listening to the Balanced Educator Podcast, episode number 135. Welcome to the Balanced Educator. We're your hosts, Kailey
and Josiane from EduCalm. Our intention is to equip and empower you to feel more calm, balanced, and joyful in all aspects of your life.
Hello there and welcome. We are so happy to have you here with us today. So in today's episode, we have a guest that I'm really looking forward to introducing you to. It's Noreen Sibanda. Noreen is a registered provisional psychologist in Alberta that prides herself in taking a biological, psychological, and social approach and values each client's worldview and experiences. She's not afraid to walk along with each client to uncharted territories at their pace by employing a solution-based approach, which amplifies their resilience and inner strength. She has a passion for working with individuals transitioning, couples, and families. Some of her other notable work includes working on youth participatory research projects with the University of Alberta, Community University Partnership, coordinating summer youth programs, working to settle newcomers and immigrants, and more recently, focusing on bringing awareness to mental health to marginalized individuals. Her passion to destigmatize and increase access to mental health services has led her to work within schools and in a community-based organization offering counseling services at a sliding scale to eliminate barriers. After years of working within the system, she recognized the need to have allies and a network of Black therapists. This led to the creation of the Black Alberta Therapists Network, ABTN. The ABTN is a group of licensed and regulated professionals working in the field of mental health and addictions that aim to normalize experiences, destigmatize accessing therapy within the Black community, and reduce barriers and inequalities experienced by Black and ethnic communities. Noreen holds a Master's of Arts in Counseling Psychology. So in this episode, I asked Noreen questions that have been on my heart this year as I've been learning more about systemic racism and white privilege. I felt very vulnerable in this episode. I was worried about saying the wrong thing, using the wrong language, or offending Noreen if I didn't know enough, or putting too much of a burden on her shoulders to explain me everything. But I feel incredibly grateful to Noreen because she was just so gracious in our conversation and encouraged me to be curious and ask questions so that I could learn more, and that if I did make mistakes, that was okay. That would be an opportunity for her to correct me and show me a different way. This conversation reminded me that as teachers, we don't have to be experts at something before trying. We can just try and make mistakes and learn from them. And I really hope that by sharing this episode that shows that I'm not an expert and I have much more to learn, it'll remind other teachers like you that curiosity and growth mindset are just as important for us adults as it is for our students, and that sharing our imperfections is a good thing. But most of all, I really hope that this episode can just be a small step towards creating a society that values all people and celebrates diversity. Now, before we get into the episode, I'm excited to share this week's sponsor. We recently heard from Ginny Horan, a community college professor who's been teaching for over 30 years. And she's been seeing students struggle more and more with college work and time management, despite all the advances in technology. Time management is the number one reason students drop out of college. So she decided to teach her students how to use a paper planner to manage their time. And they said it was life-changing. By writing down their commitments and schedule by hand and being able to see their week, the paper planner tapped into visual learning and the brain activation that happens when we actually write rather than tap. She also wanted to provide college success tips and mindfulness and gratitude prompts each week. So she created the Centered Student Planner, which includes a link to a private video channel with college success tutorials. The Centered Student Planner sold out last year despite the pandemic. It's an amazing tool for high school and college-bound students and a perfect graduation gift. Right now, they're offering a free printable booklet called The Go-To Guide to Finals when you sign up on their website. Go check it out at www.thecenteredstudentplanner.com. Again, that's www.thecenteredstudentplanner.com. All right, now let's get into this wonderful interview with Noreen. Hello there, Noreen. Thank you so much for connecting with us on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Could you just start us off by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Well, my name is Noreen Sibanda. I'm a registered provisional psychologist based in Edmonton, Alberta. I work in a variety of settings, being in private practice, in a reserve school, and also within the community. I also wear another hat as the executive director of the Alberta Black Therapists Network, which is a network of therapists coming together to destigmatize mental health within the Black community, but also increase awareness of the supports that are available. So that includes just encouraging people to receive supports, but also recognizing that therapy can be a little expensive. So we do work in collaboration with other organizations such as the Africa Center and the Action for Healthy Communities to offer therapeutic supports for individuals that I need for free.
That is amazing. It sounds like you're just doing wonderful work in the world and supporting many different communities in the work that you're doing. What brought you to wanting to become a therapist? How did life lead you to where you are today?
I guess my journey started out as I thought I was going to law school. And so I needed to take an undergrad. And what's the best courses to take in undergrad? Psych, sociology. I then fell in love with women and gender studies. Well, I think it was women's studies back then. And decided, you know what, I am doing this degree instead. So I did a double major in psych and women and gender studies. Then graduated, worked into the nonprofit world. And if anyone has ever worked in the nonprofit world, you're exposed to quite a lot of things and you work with people from different walks of life. And my particular population was immigrants and newcomers into the country. So I helped to support newcomers as they were settling into Canada and we're helping them meet the basic needs. So finding a school to go to, finding jobs, being equipped with what programs to take, but also just getting acquainted with life in Canada. In doing that work, I realized that I am doing valuable work, which is amazing, but I want to really help people understand what they've been through, because I'm talking about individuals that have either are migrating to Canada because their countries are at war or they are living unstable war-torn countries or unstable living environments, seeking greener pastures when they get here. And it's all great when they have the basic needs met. And then after the honeymoon phase, there comes this what now, right? And in order to move on, in order to actually feel assimilated as part of the culture, one actually has to address some of the things that they've been through. And I felt ill-equipped to do that after my undergrad. So I went and pursued a master's in counseling psychology so that I'll be able to actually have these kinds of conversations in a therapeutic setting, but also offer strategies and tools that people could actually put into practice.
That's really a beautiful story and seems that you're just kind of getting deeper into this work. I'd love to know how sorry. You know what? I'm kind of having this like little I'm judging myself, worried that I'm going to say the wrong thing. I'm trying to learn more about my privilege as a white Canadian and how I can do better. And I think I'm putting a lot of pressure on myself right now to not say the wrong thing or to say the right thing. And as a person that has a podcast, I want to be a model for those that are listening to the podcast. And I think I'm putting a lot of weight on myself to like make sure that I'm asking the right questions here.
But Kailey, you're doing exactly what we all need to do in reflecting about your privilege and your position is taking the first step, right? So it's not about getting it right the first time. And being an ally includes asking questions and getting it wrong, but being open to saying, hey, what can I do differently? Well,
Yeah.
what else am I missing? What piece am I not understanding? And that's why we're having this conversation in the first place. We would not be having this conversation if everything was perfect,
Yeah.
right? We're having this conversation because there's things that we can all improve on. So feel free to ask questions. And if there's something that maybe isn't, and I don't like the term politically correct because it's not about being politically correct. Rather, it is something that maybe doesn't sit well because everyone's experience is going to be different. And the way we address that is by actually expressing it and processing it out. And I hope that as much as this is a podcast, but it becomes a safe space, right? Because the work that you do is creating spaces where teachers can actually take off the hats and take a deep breath, listen, and also reflect, but also take out of the space that it's okay for them to be human, right? And it's okay for us to also be vulnerable with that.
Thank you very much for saying that. That, yeah, makes me feel much better. And you're right. I need to be okay with just asking the questions and knowing that there's things that I don't know. I think I put a lot of pressure on myself that I feel so much guilt and shame if there's something that I don't know. And I don't know what I don't know until I ask the questions and realize I didn't know it.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for that. So I guess the question that's really on my heart then is, as a white teacher with blonde hair in the classroom that has had a lot of privilege in my life, I do have students in my classroom that are immigrants, and I always want to make them feel included and welcomed because it's so exciting for me to have, people with new cultures bringing that into our classroom and into our school. It makes everything just more beautiful. And my question that I always ask myself is like, am I doing enough? Am I supporting them enough? And I'm sure there's probably other teachers like me that kind of feel the same way, or maybe there's things that I don't even know that I don't know that I should be addressing or could be addressing to make their transition into living this Canadian life better. So what advice would you have for me?
Yeah. Well, you started it very beautifully. Am I doing enough? And that question isn't towards me, but towards the students that you are working with, right? And asking them what's your experience within the educational system? Not coming in with the expectation that everyone has an understanding of how an educational system looks like and how to quote unquote behave within the classroom, or what the power dynamics that exist between a teacher and a student, right? So is this how things worked for you? If you don't know, let me know if things are not working and how we can resolve them and try different things. I'm thinking about growing up in Zimbabwe. Teachers have a lot of authority because when your parents take you to school, your teacher is the one that's quote unquote responsible for you. And that changes the dynamics that we have with our teachers. Whereas just based on us meeting today, I gather the sense that it's not you get into my classroom and I decide how things go. Rather, you're creating a safe space for the students to learn. And that's a great shift in understanding that it's a collaborative approach, right? You are learning from them as much as they are learning from you. And hence why it's okay for us to make mistakes. It's okay for us to fumble and then say, okay, let me try doing that differently. Because that's what we all need, is to model the times where something goes wrong, but we know how to fix it.
Right. Right. Now, another thing that I have been thinking a lot about, especially this year with COVID, with the students that I have that have recently immigrated to Canada, how to to get them integrated into the community so that they don't feel alone. I know with some of the students that I've spoken with, they miss their family back home a lot, and it's hard because they can't play sports to meet friends. There are so many less outlets these days, and that makes me worry about their mental health. And, I have these unanswered questions of what I could do, what can I point them towards to help them create that community here in Canada? What advice would you have for me?
So I think it goes by Michael Anga, defines 9 essential things that a child needs to feel successful: a sense of belonging, a structure that they follow and they know about, close relationships. I'm going to forget half of them right now. Participating, mastery, and having skills and tools that they can use, right? So when we talk about sports and being involved, we're not just talking about the relationship and the connection that they have, but we're talking about them mastering a skill, and that boosts their self-esteem, right? And we're not going to take away relationships. The relationships are still there. How we're connecting is a little different, right? Just because we're in isolation doesn't mean we're alone. It doesn't mean we stop being connected. So your presence, you being there, is part of building that sense of belonging and actually building the relationship. So really the advice is continue to be present and be there for your students. And you being there is making a world of a difference. Yes, they may miss the people that they have, but they can also create new relationships and new connections by just being exposed to that there's people that are willing to open their arms and let them in as well.
Right. That makes me feel like, okay, I am doing some things right. It kind of eases this worry that I feel about maybe not doing enough or providing enough, or this worry of what could I do to make things better. So I'm already, I guess, on the right track.
Yes, you are. You're fostering those relationships. You are creating a space of belonging, but also people get to choose, right? We can do everything that we feel is going to be something they need, but they also have to feel like that space is where they want to belong.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, on this podcast, we talk a lot about supporting our students' mental health, and mental health has become a conversation that just happens a lot. That stigma around mental health has been reduced a lot in the Canadian culture over, the past several years, and it just becomes more and more integrated into kind of our daily conversations. That vocabulary is there for young people now that wasn't there even when I first started teaching. Being able to express how they're feeling and talk about when they're feeling stressed and anxious has just become the norm. How is that different in the Black, Indigenous, or people of color communities that maybe us teachers that have been in Canada our whole lives are just not even aware of?
You are right. Mental health has stopped being a secondary approach to how we understand the way we live, to being really part of taking care of ourselves as part of our physical health. We're taking care of our mental health as well. With that being said, there is still some stigma that exists within certain communities. In part, obviously, when I speak, I'm not speaking for the whole Black community, but in my experience, what I've seen is within the Black community, there is an understanding of what mental health is, but also there's still a distance in how can that be something that I experience. I recently watched it's a documentary, Connecting the Dots, and one of the participants in that was talking about how, because of the representation of images of who they get to see actually talking about mental health, it was a Black student. They didn't think this was something that would affect them. So even though they may be going through these emotions, they didn't see the representation or feel like they connected with it because no one in their community was talking about it. So then it becomes quote unquote a other people's problem, not something that I experienced. And even though you're like, okay, you don't seem to be yourself, could you be going through this? They may not understand what the words mean, but not connect with it within the community. Part of it is not many languages have the word mental illness in them. It's often a paragraph to explain what that is. In the English language, it's a word. Whereas when we talk about mental wellness and as part of like overall wellness, that's a little bit better. It's a little bit easier to understand it that way. So when we think about how we even bridge that connection for students, either from the Black community, Indigenous community, it starts with understanding how they understand mental health. What language is used around mental health? Because even the stats go about when we bring in the approach of the DSM says this, there's a misconnection there. So it doesn't actually allow it to connect. Because within my culture, it is somewhat acceptable for me to say, I talk to my ancestors. But according to the DSM, that might be a hallucination, therefore qualifies for schizophrenia. Whereas within my culture, that's something that's more acceptable, right? And as much as the DSM has evolved and allowed people to create spaces to take into consideration cultures and understanding with that, there's still a lack of really understanding and the numbers to show that this is different for everyone. It's not exactly the same. So the language we use may not be you have a diagnosis. It may be you might be experiencing these symptoms. I'm wondering if you've ever thought about this. How would you deal with this? So really having those conversations from a person-centered approach rather than a problem approach where we are being diagnosed or labeled with something. In my work with a lot of teens, they love saying, hey, I have social anxiety. My first question is, what does that mean? I don't know, because it's your experience. And I can infer based on my education, but again, that's taking away from how you truly experience it.
Right. That's so helpful to just kind of put this new lens on of the language that I'm using it. I understand what it means through my perspective, but is it landing on all of my students in the same way? And am I understanding them in the same way because of that difference in language? And it's interesting. I speak French and English, and I teach in French. And so I'm very, aware of those two languages, but it really helps to think of, there's many different languages that might not even have this word. And so therefore that shows that in that culture, they see things differently. It's very interesting. And so how would you recommend kind of going about having that conversation with your students, especially in a classroom where, it can be pretty hard to have one-on-one conversations, especially these days with COVID, because you can't get close and talk quietly with a student. I've been struggling a lot with feeling like I can't really have those one-on-one conversations as much as I would like this year. So how would you suggest that we kind of take a route to become aware of the perspectives and potentially cultural differences in our classroom?
Yeah. So having the conversation at a global scale is quite important, because therefore we're not isolating any students so that they feel like it's a them problem, right? So when I do presentations to the classroom, it is really starting from what is anxiety? What are some examples of anxiety? How are some of the ways in which people experience them? But then also opening it up. Is there anything else I'm missing? Is there another way that someone else might have experienced anxiety, for example? Or, anxiety is normal. We don't want to get rid of our anxiety. So then we take away from anxiety as this big bad monster, but rather something that we all experience. And then talk about how, as a teacher or as an adult, how I experience anxiety, and then how kids might experience anxiety, and talking the things that they go through and validating them. So test taking anxiety is real. It happens. Being anxious about coming to school during a COVID, that is very much valid. Or being anxious about getting into a new sport and making friends. These are just examples. So then you give those examples. Then if kids say, how about this? Then you're saying, hey, yeah, that's also a possibility. So they get to know what it is. And this is where the emotional intelligence becomes important. We can have the words, but we also need to have the words that land based on our own experiences. Right? So when we say, how do we talk about it? Let's talk about it on a global scale. We're not directly targeting one student, but also we're opening it up for everyone. And also talking about how it may differ from one person to the next. It being different doesn't invalidate it. It being different is actually part of how we're all human. Because to someone else taking a test, they enjoy that pressure. To someone else, they don't. I sometimes talk about stress as the strings on a guitar. We want the strings to be tight, but we don't want them so tight that when you actually play, they break, right? And that's stress. So we're going to experience different types of stress. And when we think about stress as something that all kids have a visual of, they can actually put it into place. Even if it's not existent in their language, they can connect with it because, well, I would like to think all guitars look the same or at least have the same structure. So then it brings it home, right? Or even using examples of, are you a stressed out fish? Do you get baited with the hook? Well, because you're stressed, your emotions also get really out of hand. Then everyone knows what a fish looks like. And when you talk about fishing, it relates to every single culture.
That's awesome. I love this idea of kind of building the definition of this language that we're using in the classroom together as a group and taking the time to listen to our students. I always find that whenever I do things like this and we kind of talk and discuss, I learn so much. It's so much easier to understand how I can support them because they always have perspectives that I wasn't expecting and I'm always surprised. And then it gives me the opportunity to be like, okay, now I see where you're coming from. Okay, now let's approach this next thing in this way. So opening up the floor and having that opportunity is great. I'm definitely going to try that a little more in my classroom.
For sure.
That's great. So what would be your advice for a teacher that is white, living in Canada, and may not be aware of some of the struggles that their students might be living with that don't look like them and have the same privileges as them? What can a teacher do to start getting better, so to speak, getting better at being aware of their privilege and the things that they might be missing because they don't understand other people's lived experiences?
So I'll start by saying this. When we talk about diversity, I don't think we can remove the experience as a white person either, because that's also diverse, right? So when you think about it from that perspective, how I'm going to learn or expose myself is also being open to the fact that there's no monolithic way of understanding one, my experience, your experience, the students that we work with's experiences. It's going to be different, right? And we start by educating ourselves. We're having this conversation. They're listening to this podcast not because, well, I'm sure there's some fun topics that you have, but really it's coming from how do I not stay in a silo? How do I feel connected with other teachers? Because we all experience similar situations. There may be variations in how we experience it, but we all experience that. And that is to say, exposing yourself to different ways in which people view the world and where they talk about things, right? You listen to a podcast. We might be listening to Brené Brown tomorrow, and she's talking to someone who's written a book about what it looks like and how we define race and how it has been defined. We might be looking to work with people that don't look like us so that in that opportunity we can actually collaborate and learn. We are having this conversation, like I said, and in doing so, we're already becoming allies. I'm not going in and saying, she will not understand. I'm going in and saying, hey, can I expand more on that conversation that we've been having? And this is what I would like to learn. But also keeping in mind that it isn't up to the people that we're helping to be the ones that give us the information. We can take an active role by creating times and opportunities that we learn, whether we're just being exposed to, well, we watch a lot of Netflix now. We watch we are being exposed to different books or different conversations, or just saying, let me have a conversation with someone that's different than me. Or when you do have the conversations with parents, it is really staying in that curious place. In my work with the community and families, I've discovered that the way we define family is different. Right. And sometimes that's something that we don't think about in the moment. Right. Because when I think about my niece and my nephews, they are my babies. They are my children. I didn't give birth to them, but they're my children. So when someone says, who's the parent here? We all like, we're the parents. And you're like, what just happened? Simple, but it can be very much out of the norm from what someone is used to, right? So, and it's like a very small example, but it's something that gives you an idea of when I approach something, I stay in the curious. So can someone tell me how we understand these relationships? Can someone give me an idea of how I can approach this? And we're having that conversation and we're learning and we're growing together. Because just because my world is a little different doesn't mean you also know that it's different.
Yes.
Right. So I have to also be willing to come into the space and say, no, Miss Katie, this is not how it works. No, this is how it's different. Then we have the conversation and you're like, oh, tell me about it. Right. And then we can continue to have the dialogue from there.
Right. So to bounce off of that, could you tell me something that you think I might not know?
Wow, that's hard. That's hard because I'm like, I'm sticking out of an assumption. Maybe this one might be interesting. It is a little bit of history. It's not Canadian history per se, but it's U.S. history in terms of how someone might define or understand themselves as being Black. History-wise, having one drop of blood that is Black qualifies you as Black. Right? So that is to say, it isn't someone saying I'm biracial. It isn't someone saying I am 2/3 this or I'm this. It is one drop. It equates you to being Black. And part of that is the history that when we understand or when we look at how race was defined is if it deviated from white, it was no longer white. Although when you look at my niece, she may look white, but because she has one drop of Black blood, she's no longer white.
Right.
Right. So little things like that of like the way someone looks may not give you an idea of who they are.
Yeah.
Or give any understanding of what their lived experience is. There is it is a book by Dr. Yara, and it's talking about the one drop. And there's this lady who grew up thinking she was white. Lived in a quote-unquote white neighborhood. Her grandkids look white. Everyone in her family looks white. And only to discover that she's actually Creole, which in New Orleans means you were mixed. And she had to grapple with that idea of, no, I am white. Everyone in my family is white. And someone had to be like, no, you are mixed, for her to like say, to recognize or even come to terms with it. And she still continues to struggle with it.
Right. And is that something that happens a lot in the BIPOC community, this kind of grappling with identity based on how dark your skin is or the varying degrees?
Yeah, because it is an uncommunicated norm that the closer to white you are, the quote unquote, the better you are. Because that means you are more pure if we use the Eurocentric definition of what better is, right? So we're constantly negotiating, but also you get into a room and you are scanning for who looks like me, for who is close to me. So it's not just when I'm asked to check the box during the census, but it's something that I continuously have to check and figure out for myself, to an extent where there is within that variation of what Black is, it becomes, if someone else can deem you not Black enough, then you've been ostracized.
Right.
Even though outside everyone, the way the world views you is you're Black. Within that, it may feel a little different. People interact differently because of that.
Right. And that makes me now think something that I probably do not understand is what that would feel like to a BIPOC person just on a daily basis, walking into a room of new people. What is that experience like for you?
Mm-hmm. So the experience is including checking, do I belong here? There may no longer be signs on the door that say whites only or Blacks only. However, certain spaces have a sense of I don't belong here. It may not again be communicated. It just feels that way, right? And that's the part about mental health and experiences is things don't have to be written down on paper. They feel a certain way, therefore they are valid for that person, and therefore they are actually there. And that experience is tiring, to say the least. It's exhausting, right? You shared with me that you're a French teacher. When you think in French, you write in French. When you think in English and you try to write in French, it doesn't work. I know this.
Yeah.
I have an experience, right? So when I go into those spaces, it is almost that constant shifting of like, I need to think in French in order to speak in French, to write in French. And then it's like, okay, what does this space need me to be in order for me to fit in, right? So when we think about students within the classroom, they are students, they're around their peers, they're kids, and they want to enjoy. But sometimes the space may not feel like it's welcoming. When I think about students that maybe speak more than one language or are really new into the country and they're still going through their acculturation stages, and that includes what's our identity as a family, but what's your identity as a student, they end up being caught in two spaces. Where at home they speak the language, at home they act the same way that the parents expect them to. And then when they get to school, they don't feel like they can bring that with them. So now they have to act quote unquote Canadianized, but also cannot do that when they go home. So it's quite an exhausting shift to be going through each time.
Especially as a teenager who, just generally teenagers are asking that question, who am I? What is my identity? What's my place in the world? And then to have this whole new mix of things added to that, that must feel like a big burden to carry.
Truly is. Yeah. And that's why I'm like, the best word to say it is exhausted. It's not physically, but it's emotionally exhausting and psychologically exhausting because you're constantly scanning around yourself and trying to figure out, I guess it's not my story, it's someone else's story, where it is great for you to pursue your education and do well, but the moment you get home, your parent would say, well, you can't act that way here. So it's almost like you have to stop by the time you get to your front door and stop and start something else. Or when you leave home, you dress differently than you dress at school so that you can fit in, right? So it's physically exhausting for sure.
And what do you think that teachers could do to support their students through that? Is there something teachers can do to help ease that exhaustion?
I think I'm not even going to call it an initiative, but I think the movement around Pink Shirt Day, as an example, is we are addressing bullying, but also let's address some of the reasons why bullying will take place. What are some of the ways in which students would get bullied? It's easy to just say we're all wearing a pink t-shirt, but let's actually talk about why that might be and some of the reasons so that we can normalize people being different and coming from different walks of life. And when we talk about what books are we choosing to read or what books do we have around the class, kids feel represented. And it might even be a multicultural day or multicultural week where students are allowed to bring in some of their home life or things that they value from home into the classroom, right? And just because we're saying the BIPOC community, it's the same thing within the white community. Not every white person is the same. We have different cultures coming together. So there's a lot that can be brought into that space for people to celebrate and to have an understanding. And it allows for those dialogues to happen to say, oh, you also do that. Oh, you also do this, right? And in my experience, if we do something like each person brings in a food from their country and it has to do with flour, you might be surprised at how common flour is in all of the different cultures, but we all make it differently, right? Someone might be making quesadillas, someone might be making puff-puffs, someone might be making a pastry, but we're all using flour. We're all using the same ingredient, and it's interesting how all the different cultures have come to use the same ingredient in just a different way.
I love that. What a beautiful way to show both common ground and diversity in a delicious way and fun way.
I can never say no to pastries. So
yeah, exactly. Oh, that's a great idea. I love that. Now, another thing that I often have on my mind is that, if I have a couple students in the classroom, it's a classroom that's mostly white students, and then I have a couple students that are BIPOC, and I don't want to ever single them out, but I want to make them feel included, and I don't want them to feel like they have to tell their story if they don't want to. And with all that's going on, the beautiful movements of talking about racism and talking about the systems of racism and having these discussions, I want to have these discussions, and also I don't want to put that emotional weight on the students that are the minority in the classroom. I don't want them to feel that they have to be the experts in it or do the explanation. How can you guide me?
Well, it is a tough one, right? Because you want to open up the conversation, but also you're not turning around and saying, what word am I using? What's the right word so that I don't offend you, right? Because that's the difficult balance that's there, right? So really, and maybe it's going back to what I said earlier, it's taking that collaborative approach to it, and it's not talking about race isn't forgetting the white race. Talking about race isn't spotlighting a certain group only, because we're all part of the race. We all have race, right? That's something that we all have. And when you think about how do we start to have those conversations and not feel like people have to share when they're not ready to share, is doing exactly that. You're creating the ground rules and the space, right? So obviously I'm thinking we're not in a pandemic and it's not COVID and we can do things like this, where we can think about, okay, normally we are sitting on our desk. What happens when we just take away the desk and we sit in a circle and we go around, where it doesn't feel like when we turn around, we're looking at one particular person? but we're looking at each other. Everyone is part of it, right? Because I think circles have always worked in different cultures, and they're used to equalize everyone so that everyone feels like they have a voice and they can say. And we might be having a talking stick, a talking feather, whatever doll we want to use within the classroom, and say, if you want to share, feel free to take it. If you don't want to share, you are allowed to pass. And just because one person had this experience doesn't mean it's everyone's experience, right? So how we can also begin to normalize those experiences is when we are talking about any other issue, we're also highlighting the diversity that exists within that, right? When we're having career days, we're not just having one type of person that shows up to talk about a particular career. We have different people that come in, and they all look different, so that representation goes a long way into saying, oh, I could see that. I could relate with that. I could see where this is. And this is where maybe teachers can do their own active work of saying, who do I know, or who might I know who is a doctor and is someone that identifies as BIPOC, so that when they do show up, they will see that, oh, it's okay for a BIPOC individual to be a doctor as well. So when you're having these conversations, we're no longer just saying it's race, we're talking about people, because all these people get an opportunity to be everything and anything in the world, right? And you're always coming from that curious place. You're always coming from the place of, I want to understand better, right? Feel free to share if you don't want to share. Feel free to pass. Creating those ground rules and creating that safer space where kids can be themselves, right? And going back to what we said, you are already doing enough by being present. You do enough by showing up every day. That consistency is going a long way, right? And when you continue to do that, you almost like earn the right to hear their stories.
Right. Well, I feel like I've learned so much, and this was a conversation that I've been wanting to have for a long time, and I really appreciate your grace and allowing me to. I'm sure you could tell that I was a little bit nervous, and sometimes I wasn't sure if I was saying the right words or saying it the right way. And I think that having this conversation with you has allowed me to kind of approach it, as you said, just curiously, and giving myself the opportunity to make the mistakes so that I can see how I can do better. And having that growth mindset is so important. I teach that to my students. It's so important to make mistakes, but I really have to live that myself. Be willing to make those mistakes so I can learn from them. So thank you so much for giving me this safe space to be able to ask these questions that have been on my heart.
For sure. And you handled it beautifully. You acknowledge the privilege and the space that you come from, right? So it's not, I'm unaware of how things are. I'm very much aware of the world that we live in, but I want to do better. I want to improve. And that allows for people to come together. That allows for us to say, it's not you are the problem. It's not me the problem. There's a problem that exists, right? This is something that has been in place for centuries and generations, and we're merely just coming into it. And the only thing we can do to leave the world a little better than we found it is by actually having these conversations and disrupting, because in silence, in vacuums, a lot of assumptions take place. In vacuums, a lot of unsaid things become internalized and they become hurt, right? In your students, knowing that you want them to grow, to succeed, it isn't every teacher is this way. It is no. My teacher doesn't look at me that way. My teacher sees me for more than just this. And they're able to actually support me, not by knowing everything, but actually allowing me to explore it too. Because we're constantly learning. And as you said it, we're growing.
Thank you so much, Noreen. I appreciate you so much, and I appreciate the work that you're doing and the time and energy that you've shared with me and our listeners today.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
You can learn more about the Alberta Black Therapist Network at www.albertablackTherapistNetwork.com. And you can find more about their project and about Noreen there. All right. I hope that you got as much value from this episode as I did. I know after having this conversation with Noreen, there were lots of new things that I brought into my classroom in how I discuss things with my students. And I feel like it just equipped me to be okay with not knowing all the right answers and being open to making mistakes, but asking my students to correct me if I ever said something that didn't sit right. And also starting off by telling them that I might not always say everything correct and I'm wanting to learn more, so that they shouldn't be shy to let me know if I'm missing out on something, if I'm forgetting something, if I'm not representing something in a good way, because I want to learn. I'm here to learn and I'm here to improve. So thank you so much to Noreen for just helping me to take this next step in dismantling systemic racism in the way that I can in my life and what I do in the world. And always working towards that and taking the mindset of being a lifelong learner in this. I feel like this year there have just been so many injustices brought to light. I've been learning so much, and there's been a lot of things that have felt really heavy this year. And to be honest, there's been lots of times that I felt really bogged down by all the heaviness of this year and this feeling of how can I make a difference? And this feeling of I'm never doing enough in making a difference to create the world that I want to create. And that's something that I'm really working towards being realistic and saying, Kailey, you can't fix everything, but what's one small step you can take in the platform that you already have, in the interactions that you're already having, in the friendships and the relationships you already have? How can you make small, realistic changes and differences? So that's what I'm working towards. And I hope that maybe taking that perspective can be helpful to you too, if you've also felt, as I have this year, that there's just a lot of heaviness in the year. So if you have enjoyed this episode, if it brought you value, please share it with someone that you think would enjoy it too, and have a fantastic week. We appreciate you so much, and we appreciate all that you're doing in the world. Take care.